What's up world? It's Willy What If here with another video. Here is what if Deku gave up on being a hero, part 5. You know the rest, like and subscribe and all that. And let's get back to the story. And warning, this part will be not safe for your grandma's ears, or for work. Part 5. Himiko groaned as she awoke and she couldn't tell what hurt worse, her back or her chest. Slowly she came around with her eyes flickering open in confusion at her surroundings before realizing that, yes, she did in fact get drunk after Izuku didn't pick up her calls for the 5th time in a row in 1 hour. She usually would have worries about the possibility of old habits coming back in her drunken state, but even then she knew she wouldn't forgive herself for killing him. Her eyes drifted downward to her chest when a soft, beating pain roared up from there. To her surprise, her bra was off and one of her breasts looked red around the nipple, complete with teeth marks around the areola. A blanket had been put on her back and as she raised up from the floor, there came the smell of cooking sausage. Turning her head towards a small kitchen layout that was connected to the living room, she saw Izuku standing over a stove in his work clothes. A moment later he rolled the sausages onto a plate, set it to the side and poured a glass of milk from the fridge. He looked to the living room and smiled warmly when he saw her. "Morning beautiful, you sleep well?" ? And quat. She looked around once more, remembering her lack of a shirt, but didn't care to cover up. After all, he had seen it before and literally marked one. Inhaling as her feet and back throbbed in pain, she fought to muster out a smile but failed. "Yeah, but I'd say it was more due to you than anything else." And quat. A smirk was thrown her way as he set the meal down on the dining table. "Good to know I can do that right at least. Look, I'd love to stay, really I would, but I gotta get to work soon." And quat. Himiko shrugged as she put on her upper clothes from their place on the floor. "Go do what you gotta do. Work always comes before everything if you wanna not be on the streets. Trust me." And quat. Izuku nodded in agreement. Hastily he walked over to her and before she could ask, he scooped her into a hug, holding her for a few seconds before planting a kiss on her cheek and detaching himself. "I'd like to make up for last night. I know I should have dropped a message at least and you have every right to be mad like you were, but ... And quat. He laughed, spun around to where he was behind her and slung a hand into her shirt, reaching past her bra and squeezing one of her breasts while he kissed her neck one more time. "I was honestly glad you showed up. I missed you a lot while I was out and I slept pretty well too. That being said, how about I treat you tonight? We already agreed on dinner last time, so let me tick that off the box. I get off at around 4. Unfortunately I can't take a half day again because that would be bad courtesy for everyone in my office, but when I get back, I'll make sure you and I have a good time. Alright ? And quat. He let go of her, planting another kiss on her cheek before approaching the door. "Oh, feel free to stay as long as you want, but lock up if you decide to leave. I got a spare key on the hook right here, so just take that with you. Bye, Himiko." And quat. With that he threw the door open and left to do his societal duties, leaving the former murderer to stare around at the room in still slightly hungover confusion. Sighing at her own predicament, the blonde elected to not let good food go to waste. Yet she reached into a pocket on her jacket that had been tossed to the floor and pulled out a metal cylinder about the width and length of 2 fingers. It looked in all truth like a bullet toy, but she unscrewed the very top of the object and tipped it over her mouth. Soon a deep red liquid streamed down into her maw and she lapped it up greedily, studying the taste before screwing the container closed and putting it back in her jacket. That little slug should keep her good for most of the day, but Himiko rather drown out the thirst entirely like usual. It was less worrying that way. Still sitting down and eating the food, she couldn't help but think back on the haze of last night. She remembered crying, hitting and getting held, but most of her words were blank to her memory. Whatever she said clearly didn't upset Izuku too much since she was still smarting from the little nips he made at her neck and cheek. Yet, she wondered what possessed her to show up like she did. Of course she would have sought him out. She knew herself well enough to know she had a strong urge for his company to not deny it. They both did, that was irrefutable at this point. But to go straight to the bottle and flip out like she did? That was worrying. She wasn't as dangerous now that she knew how to control her quirk's byproducts, but she was still Himiko Toga. Letting her emotions out like that was reckless for anybody, infinitely so for her. There were times she had wanted to cut Izuku, not out of anger of course, but to get closer to him and maybe, just maybe show what she was really about. Thankfully it was just a slight wish instead of an obsession like in her teens. Yet, she had a good idea that for once, out of every person she had wanted to cut in her life and earnestly want to get as close to, he might just say yes one day. Of course that was a long, long way away and she was happy to walk him along to that point until they were both ready, but there was an undeniably hot idea to it. She paused halfway through the meal as her mind started to picture the scene. She could see the red lines on his body, smell the copper in the air, taste the blood on her tongue as she kneeled over him on her plastic-wrapped bed, wearing something loose-fitting that exposed everything to his wanting eyes or maybe nothing at all. There was a pocket knife in her hand, not too big, not too sharp that any permanent damage could be made if she wasn't careful. She could see him writhe in pain, but he still reached out to touch her as his naked body ran up against hers. She could feel him rub his cock up against the entrance to her womanhood, so she'd oblige him and return the favor, creating a friction between the two of them that lingered right at the edge of fully consummating their devotion to one another. All the while, she continued to make light nicks to his torso, biting with her fangs right into the soft spot on his collar as he clung for dear life to her as he went back and forth. Soon she had done away with the blade and was grabbing him by the hips, suckling at the untorn parts of skin on his neck and whispering every little thing was alright, that he belonged here with her and that she'd let him have everything he'd ever want out of her body until he finally climaxes and holds on as the energy to do anything left him, leaving him panting in her arms. Blinking as her fantasy came to a conclusion, Himiko sighed once again and went to pull a notebook and pen from her jacket. It was part of her therapy to do this, and on the plus it allowed her to track more material for her erotica novels. So far she had written nearly 30 in her lifetime, and they varied in intensity from horrifying to outright romance novels with a little banging thrown in. It helped to get all out and see her mind from another perspective while letting her take notice if any old habits were sneaking back in. So far in her nearly 6 years of freedom, she hadn't one slip up with keeping her fantasies from being too influenced by the thirst if she wasn't able to get her fill. Thinking about it, she wondered what fantasies Izuku had. He clearly had a libido and a fairly strong one to boot, but he was so reserved about it. She managed to get a fairly good time from just doing him that one favor. Maybe she should just ask if he wanted anything? Was it even the right time to ask that with how they were? She wanted something more from him, but it would take so long to get there because she would have to slip in more information about her past little by little until he was able to fully come to terms with her past and say, yes, I still love you, or I love you, but I just can't look past that horrible stuff. She had no one to blame but herself for this, since she made the choice to be a devil, so she had to manage it the best she could. Yet still, she felt the need to give him something to keep him happy. After all, he got beat to shit by her with no complaint just to see her tits, which she had already said he could feel up beforehand. Himiko let go of the rage at his choice to overlook himself and thought to consider him for a moment. He had needs like any person, and she supposed it on her to meet them, if only because she wanted to. She had some prior experience with men, never to the point of full-on lovemaking thankfully, but had learned how to handle them. Thinking about it, she smirked mischievously when she saw something pop up. He'd like that, wouldn't he? He was such a greedy bastard anyway. Shaking the thought and her notebook away to the side of the table, Himiko returned to her breakfast, glad that someone else had cooked for her for once. That hadn't happened since Kurogiri. Her muscles tightened and she felt a heavy rage come over her, but she let it go. He wouldn't want her to be upset over the past. They were set to rest long ago, best for her to move forward in their memory. Finishing the rest of the plate and draining the milk, she arose from the table and began to wash the dishes. As she scrubbed away the grease from the ceramic, her mind began to drift to questions that seemed to pop out of the woodwork. What should she do now? What was going to happen to them in the future? Would there even be a future between the two of them? Himiko grappled with the ideas, soon pacing around the living room to better occupy herself. He definitely felt something for her, and it was doubtlessly positive. She could plainly see desire and want in him, as if showing up to her home every day, groping the hell out of her any chance he was able, letting her flog him, almost deflowering her and then comforting her when she was a drunken mess didn't prove that 10 times over, but were they compatible in that way? He didn't outright strike her as one, but he was surely malleable if she paced it right. She couldn't suppress a grin at the thought of breaking him to her whims. Himiko knew it was messed up, but the concept of getting a beaten down pretty boy like him to bend to her once was thrilling. She'd start out light, of course, with just a little pain, a little twist here and there, comforting him all the way until he started to lean into it. Oh, then the things she could do to him. Himiko snapped her eyes open when she saw where this was leading. There was a shiver of disgust at her own vision when she pictured him tied up and cut with a torso littered with scars that she made while he reached and used her like lifeline, thrusting his hips into her, so more pleasure and warmth added to the pain. Her stomach turned at that. There was a high chance Izuku would not want to live a life with her as just her plaything while she had utter control over his entire existence. Sure, the thought of just having this one special person alone to herself and giving all she had was comforting, since it'd mean her loneliness was done forever, since Izuku would cling even more strongly than now, but he needed his own life. She knew she was possessive and jealous and scared, but her partner couldn't just exist solely for her or likewise or for him. He needed friends and escapes and goals, otherwise he'd waste way into just her proxy. She needed to be able to gather her emotions and not let her whims run wild and ruin both of their lives. Yes, admittedly she wanted him around and only him because he was accepting of her almost totally from what she's shown him. But, how much would he accept? Not even touching on her past. Himiko knew she was a very rough person at the best of times, and her wants were unorthodox in a bad way. Bloodletting wasn't everyone's ideal of love, and the few that she met that it was were disgusting. They didn't want her, they wanted a sadist who could hurt them, and that was it. Hell, she remembered the third guy she went out with, a fairly tall man who asked her to burn his skin with brands. He hadn't wanted a relationship with her, he just wanted the pain. She felt sorry for the guy at the time, but after he suggested they go to an orgy, she put her foot down and left. Blood and touch were a sacred thing, not to be shared by anyone other than the one who loved her, and she'd be damned 1,000 times over if she would allow that sort of self-destruction into her life. That said, however, it made her think. That guy was bad for her because of what he wanted. Who's not to say she wouldn't be bad for Izuku for the same reason? Looking back at the fantasy she had only moments ago, she could see how such a situation could adversely affect his mental health, and who's to say it wouldn't affect her mental health as well? It may devolve into an echo chamber between the two of them, and she could start to normalize acts that went over the line. Izuku was the sort of person who wanted to please, even to his own detriment, and with how much sway she had over him combined with her own tendency to manipulate, that had to be a plan for a very ugly outcome if she didn't keep level-headed. She shivered when she felt the monster knock on her heart, whispering every act of torture she'd done to get a vengeful high. If she wanted to, he'd be simple to condition, but she didn't want that. She wanted to have an average life where she wasn't on the run and alone, one with friends and a partner who loved her and her bloody needs. She had tried her normal before and it ended in misery. That normal was her quirk and trauma combining to warp her entire mind into being a monster in the body of a teen girl. That was done now. The monster was fed into a coma. She had found someone who might love her for who and what she is. Her income was stable. She was left alone and she had some idea of a future. That was who she was now. She was living her normal, and she would rather die all the way back in the war than return to the beast she was. Thus it was on her to control herself, to master the demons still slinking around her head and direct them in a positive way. She wanted Izuku and he wanted her, so if there was going to be any chance of them possibly building a life, much less a romantic one, then she had to step up and take responsibility for them both. Yet, would that even be worth it if she was wrong about him? About the two of them? What if she does irreparable damage to his skin, or he just isn't compatible like she thought and leaves? He'd walk around with a permanent reminder of the crazy bitch for the rest of his life, and she'd been alone with only the dregs of society. A chill ran through her heart at that. She had gotten used to being with someone, to having somebody talking to her and touching her and holding her. To lose that, to lose him because of her own stupidity or fate, she did not like that at all. God, she just wanted to grab him and scream what she wanted, but since she made the decision to not face the music sooner, she'd have to do this infuriating dance of spoon-feeding her past while her soul yelled to grab him, to hold him close and let him use her in turn while she opened his mind to the pleasure of blood. Sighing, she turned to her jacket once more and pulled out her phone. It was around 9 in the morning, so she wouldn't be too busy, likely just doing desk work. Finding the number, she hit the call button and waited, feeling more anxiety about the what-ifs of her relationship until the call connected. Hello ? And quat. She paused and inhaled to steady herself. This was not going to be easy in the slightest, but she had to move forward. Hey cheeky, you got a minute to talk? I have something going on and need some advice. And quat. The heroine was silent for a moment, her voice carrying a heavy condescension that Himiko could smell. It's about Midoriya, isn't it? What the hell did he do? Are you alright? I can come get you if you need. And quat. Himiko raised a hand as if to stop the woman despite knowing she wasn't in the room. No, nothing that serious. It is about Greenie, but, to put bluntly, I want to be with him. He treats me well, he isn't a creep, he indulges my tastes and ... And quat. She paused for a second as she wiped away the pretext from her mind. Last night I had a breakdown because he ghosted me for a day, the reason being that on the previous night, we almost made love. Wick and quat. There was a loud crash from the other end as heeled boots clanked against tile flooring. Wait, you did what? And quat. Again Himiko inhaled and forced herself to relax. Let me finish before you speak. So we almost went the full mile because we got caught up in the moment, but I couldn't go through with it since he doesn't know who I was. Now, when I woke up after that, he had enough courtesy to let me know he was leaving for work. But instead of heading back to my place like usual after his shift, he went to Sugarman's agency. And quat. Himiko continued to speak as the events came uncooked in her brain. Long story short, I got emotional, drunk, and decided to go confront him about leaving me alone since he completely ignored my message. Except he wasn't home, so I just sat next to his front door for an hour until he came back. I remember getting angry and hitting him, but he just took me inside his apartment. I started to cry about him abandoning me and well ... And quat. She inhaled once more as a bubble of emotion came surging up at the recollection. He laid next to me on the floor, letting me hold him until we fell asleep. I said a lot of things to him, cheeks, nothing about my past, but enough to maybe get my feelings across, and he didn't run. I beat the shit out of him till he threw up because I wanted to see him in pain and he still wanted me. He endured it for my sake, even to a point I got mad at him for, and said such nice things. And quat. There was no response over the wire for 2 minutes once the former villainess finished her explanation. Then came that exasperated groan which made her cringe in guilt, understanding how much stress she just put her savior under. Himiko, how many times do I have to tell you to be careful? This guy is a creep, I heard it myself and quat. There was a snap of anger at the resignation in the heroine's voice. The blonde's lips curled back into a snarl at the connotation that this pampered, got everything she ever wanted celebrity knew anything about someone like him after only meeting him once. He only said that because he thought you were trying to hit on him! And quat. Himiko paused once more and shook her head at her outburst. She wanted to say so much but she couldn't compress it down enough. It was like a torrent streaming from her heart that needed to be chopped down. Sorry Ochako, I heard about that little recon job you pulled on him. Can't say I blame you, but Izuku's different than all those other perverts. He needs help, so I'm there doing the best I can to build him up. Like that night when we almost banged, he was having an issue with his mother over her wanting to set up an arranged marriage for him with some bitch he never met. And quat. The blonde continued to speak despite a slight stammer coming to her voice. Embarrassment was rolling back into her skin and she was almost hesitant to explain everything that went on. He asked for my help, so I obliged him and met his mother. She was nothing but this controlling, helicopter parent of a woman, and it got so bad that I grabbed him by the wrist and took him out of the house with me. Then once we got back to my place, I put on some nice lingerie and got to flog him for a while. Afterwards, when he was well enough, he took me into my bedroom and started to feel me up. It felt amazing to have him touch me like that and ... and quat. The former criminal clenched her fists at the unfairness of it all. If she hadn't messed up her entire life, then she could just skip all this meticulous bullshit. Yet she backed down from the emotion. Uraka was a friend. Her only friend in all the world other than Izuku now, and she knew what she was. What I'm trying to say, Cheeks, is that things are moving between me and him. I've shown him some of what I'm into and he hasn't been bothered by it, not thrilled either, but there's certainly a spark. And he's been there for me so far. Hell, he offered to give me a copy of his house key. And quat. Uraka absorbed all of the information as efficiently as possible, careful to not lash out like her instincts were saying. Her voice was flat and dead with a slight hint of warmth. Are you asking if you should tell him about your time before you went clean? Because, Himiko, I'm going to tell you now. If anyone learns about your history, then I legally am required to relocate you for your own safety. The only way around this is if the person is your spouse, and even then the HSCP will be scrutinizing everything before it's passed. And quat. Himiko flopped herself down on the sofa in his living room and pursed her lips at the reality of her situation. No, we have a long way to go before that comes up. What I wanted to ask is, if you were in my shoes, without the issues of my past, and you wanted to let him know how you feel, what would you do to prove it? Because I'm scared of him getting creeped out and leaving, and I think I love him. And quat. Himiko stumbled as she remembered what that word used to mean when they were teens. Not in a psychotic, I want to become him way, but in the I want to be with him kinda way. And quat. Pity filled the air once Uraka answered. Her tone was sweet, high and comforting. Exactly like when Himiko had begged for help in the ruins of that building on that fateful day. Why are you thinking so hard about this, Miko? And quat. A pit began to grow in her belly at the heroine's words, and she soon felt a storm gather in her chest as her true intentions came to the surface. It was hard to say, but it had to be, otherwise it might never happen. Breathing with every measure of self-control she had, Himiko answered, the result of which made her feel like her soul was leaving her body. Because I think I can have a life with him. That despite all the evil bullshit I've done, I can maybe have one good thing about my life. That I don't have to be alone anymore. And quat. There was a certain steel quality to her speech, one that sounded more sure than she thought it would. Uraka said nothing for what felt like years, but eventually she did. Well, I think that's a good enough goal, and if you really believe that there's potential for what you want, then I would start acting on it instead of thinking about it. So long as it isn't violent, you should just say what you want from both him and yourself. If whatever weird stuff gets your rocks off is okay by him, then go for it. But I'm begging you not to tell him anything about what you did, because if that gets leaked to the public, I'm gonna be the one punished. And quat. Himiko nodded, grateful for her friend's sagely advice once more. Thanks, Cheeky, I'll think about that. See you next week. And quat. Cutting the call off, the slasher suddenly felt exhausted, like everything inside her had erupted out and left her feeling drained. Looking at the clock, it was still early in the morning. She had some work to do, but the deadline was weeks away and it wasn't an article that would require a lot of effort, so she effectively had the day off. Her more curious side wanted to go snooping around his things, yet that was shot down when she realized that she could effectively come and go as she pleased now. Besides, he gave her this privilege from a place of trust. If she wanted anything she said to stick, then she needed to live it even in the smallest way. Walking over to the key peg by the door, she picked up the spare and slipped in on her keyring. Yet before she had to leave, Himiko halted as an idea came to mind. Sitting herself down on the dining table and ripping a blank page from her notebook, she laid it flat on the surface and began to scribble and write. It was a small gesture, sure, but it was hopefully enough to start to show how much it helped her. Stamping it to the fridge with a magnet, the girl made sure to double-check all her possessions before she opened the front door. Taking one last look at the apartment, she flipped the lock shut and walked out to the hallway of the complex. Upon making sure it was locked properly, she began to make her way home, wondering all the while what was to happen next between her and the man wonderful enough to be there. You haven't responded to my calls in 3 days so far, sweetie, and I'm becoming concerned. I understand you're a grown man with your obligations, but recently you have been acting very strangely. First was leaving with that blood girl. Then when I called your office to make sure you were alright since you didn't show up after your shift like I asked, your manager said you took a half day. Now you've just been completely silent and I want to know you're alright. Please just give me a text if you can, please ? Izuku scowled at the message on his screen and deleted it. After everything that went on last night, the last thing he wanted to handle was that overbearing, cry-bullying, I know better for you bitch. He had a night out with Himiko to think of, so he would do just that. However, as he sat in on the metro, his phone began to vibrate as a call was coming though. It wasn't a number he knew, but he was on the do not call list for telemarketers, so he let the call go through. Putting to his ear, he wondered who the hell could be calling him. Hello ? There came a high-pitched, bubbly voice on the other line that he instantly recognized. Hey Midori boy, it's me Ashido. I thought I would drop a call and check up on you, seeing as you were pretty bummed out at the bar last night. So what's new with you ? A wave of guilt came crashing over him as he recalled the interaction he had with the pro heroine. She was so nice to him and didn't belittle his quirklessness like others would. It was a shame what he thought to do. Rubbing the back of his neck nervously, he answered, I got off work 10 minutes ago and I have a date in the next hour. Silence came over the speaker, causing Izuku to flinch. He hoped he hadn't hurt the poor woman's feelings, but it was better to let these sorts of things be known sooner rather than later. Yet a laugh came from the other end that chased away those worries. Ah, that's awesome. So who's the lucky lady ? He blushed a bit at her ease of speaking, but thankfully most of his old anxiety around women was gone, thanks to Himiko. My best friend. I've known her for 4 months now and she's helped me out tremendously. She was the one who pushed me to apply to Sato's agency actually, so I owe her a lot. Another giggle came that sounded heavenly to the ears. She sounds like a great person, so what's on the agenda for you two ? Izuku shrugged, finding it plain enough in his mind. Well, if our previous encounters are anything to go on, I'd wager we'd, You know, now that I think about it, this is gonna be the first time I've gone somewhere in public with her. You don't say? That is kinda weird. What is she? A vampire who stays in her lair all day ? A laugh came from Izuku this time. She does have a blood quirk now that you mention it. All we've really done is just stay at her place since it's the most private we can get. Last night though she barged her way into my apartment. There was a sharp pause that seemed to cut through the air before Mina managed to retort. I see, so was she waiting for you to get back home while you were chatting with me ? A sliver of guilt cropped up when Izuku recalled how wrecked Himiko was while waiting for what very may have been all night. Yeah, she sat by the entrance to my place for a while until I got there and she said a lot of personal stuff, so I'll keep it to myself. However, Ashido, let me ask you, since you're a chick, if you showed up drunk to a guy's doorstep, waited for him to come home, got pissed enough to start hitting him, then a minute later you told this guy he was all you had and begged him not to go despite him never having the thought of leaving, what would that say about how you viewed him ? The confusion in his voice was ripe enough that it could be felt over the phone, and as such the acid heroine grinded her teeth for a moment. Personally, I've never been that in need of someone, but if somebody is telling you that, then they probably really like you, maybe to an unhealthy degree. Why exactly was she there waiting for you ? There was a slight flare of octane which exposed his happiness at the idea of being loved, but it didn't seep out too much. Basically she got worried since I had my phone off the entire day and didn't show up to her place. She got drunk because she thought I was trying to abandon her, but that was far from the truth. Long story short, she had a breakdown, so I just held her for the rest of the night until we both fell asleep on the floor. Mina contemplated the words and in the end, she smiled despite herself. Aw, that's really sweet. But, if you have someone like that in your life, why were you at Toshi's last night ? Izuku mused on it for a moment before shrugging again. To gain more friends. She's really the only friend I have other than maybe Sato, and he's my boss. Honestly, he said I should try to get more female friends because it'll give me less of an issue with her mentally. See, so far for nearly 5 months I've only had her to talk to and she's very eccentric. Likewise, I'm the only person she talks to since her quirk scares everybody else away. As you can guess, that isn't exactly the best place to be if things go sour for either of us. So I'm trying to make a support group to get over my issue for her. He grinned stupidly at nothing when imagined himself getting more friends. It was like a childhood goal he never had the chance to meet until now. Like you said, I can be pretty bummed at times and she deserves better. Only I have some issues about me, so what better way to get rid of them than by learning from more well-adjusted people. The mutant crime fighter unknowingly returned the smile as her heart swelled in empathetic glee at how adorable it sounded. That's quite noble of you, Sir Green Bean. Making any sort of improvement about yourself is as good an aim as you can get. You know this gal is lucky to have you. That be said, do you mind if we meet up Friday like we planned? I can give you some relationship tips. Izuku shrugged as he held in a giggle. Sure, Toshi's alright? I'm pretty sure Sato is gonna drag me along there this week anyway. Mina responded with another laugh as she finally found something to occupy her empty days with. You bet, first round's on me though. Tell your girlfriend hi for me, okay Midori boy? Bye. The call ended at her digression, leaving Izuku to enjoy the strange lighter than air feeling in his chest. Just in time too, since his stop had just arrived. Stepping off the tram, he needed to first reach his apartment before anything else to get his things. He couldn't show up empty-handed, now could he? He moved with a slight skip in his step when he eventually got to his apartment complex. A great night was ahead and he hardly had to wait. He would get to pamper the woman who had done so much for him, and afterwards he'd get to pleasure her, to uncoil some of the knots building in his gut and simply act as he wished. He grimaced a bit at the thought of another painful game, but if that's what she wanted and so long as he was the only person she was doing it with, then fine. Briefly he felt his heartbeat increase when he imagined grabbing her and running his hands all over that wonderful body again. She was beautiful beyond compare and she was all his. He wanted her, needed her tonight. His fists tightened as more pressure built up in his body. Soon, very soon he'd be able to see her. Unlocking the door and twisting the knob, Izuku entered his apartment and felt a sting of disappointment when he realized Himiko hadn't stayed until he got back. It was probably for the best since she had her own obligations to meet. As nice as it would be to have her revolve around him, he knew that was unrealistic. Putting the thought away, he moved into the living room and threw his work satchel on its appropriate peg next to his room door. It was another shitty day at the office, but it'd be worth it in a half hour. Yet the man paused when noticed something magneted to his fridge. It was a note in a flowery handwriting that curled elegantly around the paper. Reading it, he found that it said as followed. Hey Greenie, sorry I couldn't wait for you to get home. I needed to get my supplement requirements taken care of back at my place. Regardless, I can't wait to see you again tonight. It's been a long time since anybody's made me feel that way, and I wanted to say thank you for being there last night. I know I acted stupidly and you had every right to turn me away, but you helped me get my emotions out and held me until everything was better. Words can't really describe how grateful I am for that, but I want you to know you mean a lot to me. See you soon. Himiko and Quat. Izuku read the message and felt his heart squeeze a bit at that. He wanted to jump and shout in joy, yet he knew he couldn't. So instead he hurried to prepare himself. However, before he could reach his room to gather his clothes, there came a knock on the front door. Instantly his smile perked up. She must have come here this time around. Grinning like the luckiest man in the world, he imagined scooping up the blonde woman in his arms the second he opened the door and hearing her squeak in good-natured protest. When he opened the door and saw who was standing in the hallway, his smile dropped like it had never been there. He was staring at the angry green eyes of his mother, who stood like she had something to say. Expecting someone else, Izuku questioned Mark and Quat. The man lowered his brows into a glare, piercing the woman with equal ire. Yes, actually, why are you here? Questioned Mark and Quat. Inko crossed her arms at the answer, giving the don't you dare speak to me in that tone expression. I came here to check up on you since you've been silent for almost 3 days in a row. We have to talk about that girl and why you keep hanging around her. And Quat. Izuku closed his eyes and withheld a mounting tension of anger at his mother. Instead he stepped from the doorway, allowing her to enter as he entered his room to withdraw clothes. Inko continued to glare at him with the annoyance of her usual need for control. Izuku, you don't understand what kind of person you're getting involved with. That girl has already shown to be unstable just within the first 20 minutes of us meeting. If you keep this on, then it'll only get worse. And Quat. He said nothing to this, not even looking in her general direction, while he shuffled into the bathroom and closed the door. The shower flipped on, granting him a short reprieve before having to return to the living room. His attire was a black hoodie, dark jeans and red sneakers, which felt far better to wear after being in his work uniform for so long. When he stepped out to see his mother staring with that same disappointed anger bubbling in her eyes, he said nothing. Sit down and talk to me, Izuku, you and Quat. Inko never got to finish her statement since her son managed to unlock the front door and had dashed out of the room like a bay out of hell once the door was open, leaving her to stare at the empty air in bewilderment. Her child did not look back when he fled until he managed to reach the train station. Izuku loved his mother, but he'd be damned if that woman would ruin his night. Sighing in relief when the sliding doors of the tram shut, he reached for his phone and dialed Himiko's number. It had taken a few seconds before it finally connected, letting her voice carry into his ear. Yellow? What's up, Greenie? Questioned Mark and Quat. Hey Himiko, just wanted to let you know I'm on my way. And Quat. There was a hint of venom in the girl's words that was diluted by the sea of warm sarcasm which made the quirkless man glad. Well, it's good to know you can actually keep in touch. I was starting to think I'd have to hunt you down again. And Quat. He smirked at the sentiment. I was thinking of surprising you by showing up unannounced. But then I thought that would end in me getting shanked. And quat. Himiko laughed at the idea, her tone having a progressively more enjoyable quality in her response. Oh, but I couldn't stab someone so helpless. It breaks my heart to see you that hurt. Instead, I would probably drag you inside, tie you up and discipline you until you learned the rules again like a good boy. And quat. The smile remained on his face. Would I get a reward after it? And quat. A few hums came and went, teasing the air before ending. Maybe, it'd depend on how much I'd need to do until you learned, or if I was feeling generous that night. And quat. Izuku shook his head at the ridiculousness of the conversation. Great to know I'm still in your good graces. Anyway, have you thought about where to go to eat? I got paid so the price isn't an issue. And quat. Himiko laughed again at his words. What can I say? You're my baby after all. And I'm feeling pizza. Actually, let's go to a buffet. That way we can eat all we want. And quat. A cringe ran up his spine at her weird pet name for him, but it was quickly forgotten. Okay, a buffet it is. I'm assuming you're talking about the one on 103rd Street in downtown, right? And quat. Yep, that's it. Nice, cheap and filling. Something for us to whittle the time away with while we have a nice long discussion. And quat. Izuku suddenly felt sweat gather on his skin as his nerves began to jump. Is there something important for us to talk about? And quat. In equal strides there came a flatness to her voice that had all ounces of playfulness vanish, making her sound more authoritative and matriarchal than even his mother. It was the same tone she had when she pulled him out of his home to escape his mother. Don't play stupid, you know exactly what I'm talking about. After last night, it's time for us to sit down and talk about what we're gonna do moving forward. We'll do it or I'll drag you down right to my couch and tie you up until we clear the air. Do I make myself clear? And quat. He let out a nervous laugh as he fought back from immediately repeating the mantra that had been literally beaten into his head on the night they left his apartment. I don't have an issue with talking, but wouldn't it be better to have a conversation like that in private? And quat. The response was ironclad from how it sounded. No, we're talking in public because we'll be less likely to have an outburst than if we talked in my apartment. And quat. Her decisive steel vanished slowly as she laughed a few seconds afterwards. But honestly, Zuzu, I'm not worried. We both know I have you wrapped around my little finger and you just love it, especially when I take care of you. And quat. She continued with a blush enticing hint in her voice. This is a little formality, because otherwise why would you keep coming back? You know exactly what I do, you feel exactly as I do. This is just the part where we say it. But I'm a greedy girl, so I'm going to squeeze it out of you one drop at a time tonight, right in view of everybody else like I did with your bitch of a mother. Because I love having other people know the truth about what we have. And quat. Nothing in the world could describe how flustered he was or how grateful he was to be sitting down. His entire face looked like a tomato as he managed to withstand some of the heat seeming to rise up from his chest. That's, I'll see you in a few minutes. And quat. There was a hook in her voice that dug deep into him and pulled as she let out the last of her more seductive emotions. For now, I'll be waiting. And quat. The call ended, which left Izuku praying that tonight would go well. Later, when he arrived at her apartment complex, the green-haired man paused for a moment to steel himself for what was ahead. This was going to be a very important night for them both. Knowing her, it would likely leave him shaken. That was the last thing he needed when they were going to discuss whatever they had between them. He had to be in control of himself and not let her dictate how things would go. Heading up the stairs to her apartment, Izuku knocked on the door, sure that there would be a girl holding a knife on the other end. His assumption was proven completely correct when Himiko opened the door with her tanto knife in hand. She was unusually well dressed compared to almost every time he came over, with an unassuming dark blue hoodie, jeans, ponytail and yellow sneakers instead of those week-old pajamas. She grinned at him, not saying anything as her free hand grabbed his collar like he owed her money and pulled him inside. The door shut behind him with a slam when she slid the tanto over the nearby table and used her other arm to close it while still keeping a hold on him. In an instant Himiko walked closer to him, wrapping the hand knot on his collar around his waist and gently tugging down on his hoodie so that they were eye level. Silence continued to rule between them as her yellow eyes studied him before she leaned in and pecked him on the cheek. Glad to see you at last, Greenie. I was getting impatient. And quat. He would have stuttered, he would have blustered, and he would have lost all control of the situation if he hadn't gotten the experience from her. So instead of fighting against his instincts, Izuku leaned into them and entrapped her in his arms, making sure to look her in the eyes when he spoke. You should know it's better for me to be fashionably late. It gives you more time to think about what we're gonna do. And quat. The former villain smiled knowingly at the slight heat in his voice, wiggling a bit closer in the bind to show it. And what did you think that entails? And quat. A hand ran through her hair as he dared to move the hand around her waist low enough to squeeze her rear. Depending on if I fuck up or not, we're gonna have nice dinner, talk a little or a lot about what this is, and then I believe I'll let you mess me up a bit if you're in that mood. Then I'm going to carry you to that bed and see if we can have another good time. Am I somewhere on the mark? And quat. She laughed at his speech, slowly moving his hand from her butt to her hip as she rubbed a small section of his back. Close. I understand I went a little overboard last time and you need time to recover, so I'm willing to skip the rough stuff. In fact, I might give you a reward since I still owe you back then. And quote. The expression on his face switched from one of semi-suave confidence to one of something mixing guilt and relief, breaking the mood. You don't have to hold back on my account, just don't hit my belly and I'll be good. And quote. Himiko ran her index finger over his chin, lifting it down with an adoring smile. Oh, but I do. You're my baby, so it's my responsibility to see that you're okay, and I say you need rest. Or do you want to disobey me and not get your reward? And quote. He looked down to the floor, not out of shame, but frustration. Letting go of her, Izuku walked to the center of the living room with more of the same resting on him. They stared at each other for a moment before the green-haired man finally spoke about what was bothering him. Look, that stuff may not exactly be my cup of tea, but I'm willing to bear it for you so long as it isn't too insane. It's the least I can do after you helped me so much. Now I don't know how much you enjoy what you had me do, but I want you to be honest. Do you want to be rough with me tonight? And quote. Himiko smiled warmly at him, walking to where he stood and taking him down to the couch behind him with her arms wrapped around his belly. They laid there for a minute as she nuzzled into his back, enjoying the closeness for a while until he seemed calm enough. I appreciate it, Zuzu, but you did enough for me last time. It'll tide me over till you're well enough to play my way again. In the meantime, I'll enjoy you handling how good I feel. And quote. The man exhaled, grabbing one of her hands and caressed a thumb over the knuckles. If you say so, Himiko. And quote. The hand moved from his grasp and tapped him on the lips with an index finger, making him surrender to her will in the most passive way possible as her mind turned. You never said what you wanted your reward to be. And quote. Izuku mused on her words, shifting the finger away from his mouth as he turned and placed his arms around her. He slipped his head below hers, digging his chin to her shoulder and squeezed a little tighter. All I really want is to eat. I had to skip lunch today. Though, I don't mean to push it, but could I? And quote. A nestle of shame filled him. See you without your panties on? And quote. The blonde froze at that. She had no problem exposing herself to him beforehand, but that made her a little uncomfortable. Not that she believed he would take advantage of her vulnerability, but that if, when they got caught up in a moment with each other again, there wouldn't be that half second of fabric to grant them enough time to think before they acted. She wanted to show him, however. She wanted to dance and strip and more for him because it made her feel so wanted in his eyes. Yet she also knew that would lead to him asking for more intimate things. He'd already asked to eat her out before they even got this physical. But if she denies him this, then she'd also have less bargaining power, since he'd lose faith that she'd likely say yes to what he wanted. Weighing the options, Himiko bit her lip and chose to go with it for the sake of getting her way in the future. Alright, fine. You can see my pussy, but you can't touch. And quote. Izuku grinned, finding the blush spreading over her to be unusually attractive. With a turn of his torso, he was now on top of the woman, with her staring up at him in mild annoyance. A kiss was planted on her neck as his body weight pinned her, making him stare playfully at her. You are quite the woman, you know that? Most would have given up by now, but you're strong. I like that about you. And quote. Himiko huffed at him, turning her head away from his adoring gaze. Oh, what would you know about any of that? You're even more of a virgin than I am. And quote. He laughed as his arm scooped her up and brought her close when he managed to get to the upright position. I know most people give up on their values and boundaries if something gets too hard or they want it. If it was any other woman in my arms right now, they would have given up to me already, but not you. You keep your virtues and your word even when you know we both don't want that. That's what makes you so amazing, Himiko. It's why I'm so proud to have you in my life. And quote. A heavier blush crawled over her as Izuku started to lay right on top, caressing the side of her face like an idiot. Pushing herself off the sofa, she reached for her coat and bag. Come on, sweetie boy, we have a meal to catch. And quote. He stared at her with that ridiculous grin as he got to his feet. I mean what? And quote. The words were halted when she raised 3 fingers his way. Izuku hesitated for a moment, then mentally gave up any pride when it came to this. Lord knows it was beaten into his head well enough. Yes, mommy. And quote. Himiko oozed satisfaction at hearing him say that, having it appear in that self-superior smile as she trapped his arm around her own. Good boy, now let's go. And quote. Walking into the waning sunlight of the afternoon, they moved along the winding streets making small talk about this and that until they finally got to where they wanted to be. The restaurant in of itself was very Western. A big red brick building with a nice blue neon sign out front advertising the large variety of foodstuffs on the menu ranging from beef to squid and everything in between. Himiko poked him a bit in the air as they entered, loving how he winced under her touch while refusing to move away. The meals paid for, they sat down in an empty booth. All around them was mostly vacant space due to it being a weekday, which suited them both fine. So Zuzu, how should we start this off? And quote. Izuku shrugged as he sat back in his seat. Anything you want to say first? And quote. Himiko shrugged in return. Yeah, I like you. More than anybody else I've ever met that wasn't in my family, so, can we start going steady? You know, you being mine and me being yours ? And quote. Izuku sighed as he saw the hope burning in her eyes. It was the same hope he had before many times with other people. I'm not against that. Besides, it's like you said, we both know what we have, so this a formality to clear the air. But, Himiko, I'm gonna be honest, I'd be thrilled about bringing with you permanently, especially after all you said last night. Yet there's a lot about me I don't know, and this is completely new territory for me. New emotions, new sensations, and, I'm going to be upfront with you about this, I am very possessive. Like to an unhealthy degree. And quote. He popped the joints in his knuckles as he fought back a wave of those feelings, darting his eyesight from her to the walls and back again. What I'm trying to say is that I have issues, very deep and unresolved issues that might make me more trouble than I'm worth in the long run. And quote. A shoe kicked right into his shin as Himiko glared at him. Don't be stupid. I have a criminal past, was abused and neglected as a child, have no friends or family, love sadistic stuff, and need to regularly drink 3 cups of blood a day to not get dangerously psychotic. If anything, you're the one getting the bum deal here. You've just been beaten down all your life. And quote. She ran a hand through her ponytail and groaned at his self-defeating attitude. Look, if you want to be possessive of me, then go ahead. You want to fuck me till we both collapse, then once we get there, go ahead. You're allowed to act out around me, for fuck's sake. I'm not somebody you have to wear a mask around all the time. And quote. His head lowered at her words, but she wasn't done yet. I'm done with the back and forth pity-guessing stuff. Life is too short for that, and I want to start making something of myself with you. So can you give me your answer ? And quote. He eyed her for a moment, staring right into her very soul. Do you promise to let me know if I get out of line or if I start getting irritable or violent? Because when my emotions run that high, if things go wrong, then I tend to put way too much into it, and that worries me. And quote. Himiko rolled her eyes, imagining what he'd say if found out what she used to do to the people who rejected her. You have my word that I will, and if that starts to happen, then I won't turn you away. I'll sit down with you and we'll talk it through just like you did for me. And quote. Steel entered his spirit when he spoke next, making sound like the authoritative one for once in his life. Do you swear to enter a monogamous relationship with me? No other partners or anything like that at all? Meaning only I can help you with your needs and vice versa. It also means that if you break it, then I'll leave and never look back, even if I do care for you. I just won't allow myself to be used like that. And quote. Himiko smiled in unspoken relief at his words. Thank God he wasn't a freak like everybody else. That's more than okay, because I expect the same from you. And quote. Izuku didn't say anything as he sat there brooding on the concept. He hadn't felt his heart soar at that. If anything, the feeling was comparable to being handed paperwork he had barely any idea how to work on. It was more of the same with how they were, wasn't it? They had started to sleep together in the same bed, and he came over even on work nights to see her. He knew it was a certain thing, and she had earned a modicum of trust from him, but now that he had her, what now? How were they going to maintain what they had in the long term? What if something goes wrong or some tragedy strikes? He knew neither of them were very stable individuals, but on the flip side, so much could go right for once. Neither of them would be alone, and there would always be someone there when they needed to get something out. He earnestly knew he would not give up what they had. Sure, he would leave if he was betrayed, but aside from that, he had practically locked his jaw. Pursing his lips, Izuku let out another shrug. Glad we're in agreement. Now that we've finished that, let's eat. And quote. Himiko smiled warmly while she got up with him, feeling like a mountain had been lifted from her shoulders. Good idea, Greenie. And quote. 3 courses were had and devoured by the two of them as the night dragged on, leaving the moon to reign over the sky as the clock ticked down. Eventually the pair left to return home. The streets of the city were packed with those going to places only they knew. It was a cold night that slit through the fabric of clothes, making the two cling harder as they moved for warmth. Around them was the dense architecture of the landscape, a mega city made to house hundreds of thousands if not billions at this point. The sidewalks were filthy and riddled with grime while cars passed by puffing exhaust fumes into the air. Alleyways dotted every few blocks, causing Izuku to pull her closer as his instincts were beginning to suspect something was wrong the further he walked. He scanned all around him like a hawk, never letting his arm slacken around her waist, while Himiko, for all intensive purposes, looked right at home in comparison. There wasn't an ounce of fear in her body when her eyes scanned all around her in a very subtle and unnoticeable way. Though if he was to look down at her hand, Izuku would have spotted her quietly slip a folding knife up her coat sleeve. He felt the weight in his own pocket, suddenly glad he decided to carry the knife he took when he first woke up in her apartment. They halted suddenly when there came the sound of footsteps coming from up ahead. In the street lights 3 men were visible. They were lanky, noisy people with the look of people searching for trouble. That was only proven true when the leader of that gathering, the bulkiest one who had taken point, smiled maliciously when the pair came into view. He was a good 1.5 feet taller than Izuku, with what had to be a mutant quirk considering the bullhorn sprouting from the sides of his head. The man's attire was a bright fire red blazer, jeans and black dress shoes. His lackeys were dressed, oddly enough, in the same blazer, pants and shoes with only blue and yellow instead of red. They appeared like baseline humanity to a T with no distinguishing features which might hint at their quirks. The bull-headed man approached the couple with a swagger in his step. He had that same sure of himself quality Izuku had seen countless times with punks who picked on him. Except this one decided to stop right in the middle of the sidewalk and block their passing. "Well, I gotta say sir, you have a mighty fine piece of ass on your arm. How'd you manage to bag a lady like that? I'm a little jealous you see and was wondering if you'd mind if my friends and I had a little chat with her. And quat. How many times has something like this happened where he had gotten something good, even the tiniest bit, and an idiot who was bigger, stronger or meaner rushed in to steal it? Everything from Kachan burning his quirk notebooks to those assholes who stole his potential in high school because they used quirks to this fuckwit. How many times has somebody come right in and tried to fuck with his life and steal the few good things he had?" Izuku let go of Himiko, moving forward towards the larger man blocking the way with a light shining in his eyes. He was 24 now. He had tried to kill himself 3 times already and was just starting to have a better life. He would not give any of that to any motherfucker, least of all what he had with her. The bull man and Izuku were less than a foot away now, the mutant looking smug at his physical superiority while his friends flanked him on either side, the quirkless sidekick looking utterly blank as he stared into the stranger's eyes. In a flash Izuku's hand reached out and seized the mutant's index finger, yanking it out of the socket and delivering a punch to his nose right as he grabbed the man's collar. Another punch followed as a scream of pain echoed out from the unlucky punk as Izuku hit him again and again and again until blood was starting to splatter from his broken nose. He knew he had to be thorough and decisive before the shock wore off. So when he was certain the man was fully disoriented and his buddies still reeling from what had happened, Izuku reached into his pocket. There came a sharp click as the blade was flipped out from the handle. It was a short, elegant thing of a single-edged blade a little longer than a middle finger that ended in a sami-type grind. It was light in Izuku's hand and when he saw the bull man's eyes go wide when he put it to his neck, he knew he had already won. Nobody breathed, nobody moved as Izuku pressed the edge to the fool's throat, the sharp steel already drawing blood from the skin parting upon meeting it. There was a quality about Izuku's eyes now, one that seemed dangerous and calculating as he held the man hostage. His voice had a simple monotone about it, like one stating facts and had no reason to argue the point. "You have really fucked up. You and your pals thought it would be a good idea to try and rough up me and take her from me. Right now I've half a mind to open your throat in front of these 2 losers right before I gut them too. If you were just threatening me I wouldn't care, but you had to go in and involve my girl. And quat. He pulled the hand holding the knife away and slammed the back of his knuckles across the man's cheek before placing the point under his chin. "Nobody gets to do that. She's all I got and you idiots tried to take her from me. That alone gives me the right to castrate you, but you're not worth it, so here's what's going to happen. You're going to walk the other way across the street, take your dumbass friends with you and we'll never see each other again, understand?" And quat. The mutant nodded slowly with the fear of one facing death. Checking to see the same fear in the fool's friends, Izuku let go of his collar and walked backwards towards Himiko. The 3 turned from the pair and ran across the street, sprinting in the opposite direction while Izuku watched like a wolf tracking its mark until they were all out of sight. He felt his heart thunder as he realized what he had done. It wasn't out of guilt, but in the thrill of knowing he had won. Yet he didn't have the mind to smile when he turned back to his partner as he closed the knife and slid it back into his pocket. She regarded him coldly, not in a hateful way or even a sadistic way, but more akin to a predator measuring if further challenges were coming from around him. Izuku put a hand to her wrist, glad to touch her again after all that. "You okay?" And quat. She stared at him for a heartbeat, then wrapped him up in a hug as she lunged forward. They remained like this for a few minutes while Izuku ran his hand over her back, understanding what she was doing. "Let's go home." And quat. It was a long slog to reach her place with Himiko completely mute the whole way as they took the train. Once they got to the complex and Izuku brought her to the door of her apartment, she turned in resigned defeat, clinging to him as what could only be described as a sad puppy eyes look came over her. "You sure you can't spend the night?" And quat. Izuku shared her sentiment as he tapped at his watch feeling like he'd been swindled by time. "I would if I could, but it's going on 10 now and I can't afford to be late twice in the same week." And quat. Frustration showed brightly on her face as she opened the entrance to her home, not letting go of his torso. "Not even for just 15 minutes? Please?" And quat. He shook his head reluctantly, returning her grip in kind. "I'm sorry, I would if my job wasn't so demanding." And quat. There came a spark in his eyes as an idea cropped into his head. Caressing the side of her cheek, he smiled lovingly at her. "But I think I know what I'd like my reward to be tonight and you might get a little mad at me, but I think I'll take it without asking." And quat. She raised an eyebrow at the tone of his voice, leaning her head up at the more romantic sense in his words. "What exactly do you have?" And quat. Himiko never got to finish the sentence when Izuku grabbed the back of her head, stepped closer and went for it. It was a nice, warm sensation that lasted a few seconds until he pulled away. They had kissed. Sorry about just taking it, but I figured as a guy it was something I had to do. And quat. Izuku studied the bewilderment on her face as he smiled, wishing that he could stay longer more than anything. Yet reality called, so he let go and moved to leave. I'll see you soon, alright? We can have some fun then. And quat. He was halted when an arm hooked around his neck, pulling him back as Himiko held on for dear life. Can you come inside, please? I need you to do something for me. And quat. There was an urgency in her voice that bordered on frightened as the quirkless man struggled for a moment before giving in to her wishes and relaxing. Fine, since you're asking so much. And quat. He was dragged into the apartment as she shut the door behind her and let go to immediately fetch a first aid kit from the kitchen. Izuku watched her work to triple check the medical supplies with a slight apprehension. He wasn't sure what was up, but he hoped it wouldn't be too bad. Himiko placed the kit on the coffee table in front of the sofa, along with her phone set to the emergency number before hurrying over to him. She withheld some of the urgency in her voice, but Izuku knew it was there when she spoke. I'm sorry to ask this on such short notice, but, would you let me bite you? Just one time tonight? And quat. He raised his eyebrows at her request, then noticed the size of her canines and gulped as he clamped a hand over his own neck. Where exactly? And quat. She tapped a finger over where her neck and shoulder met, directly above the collarbone. Right here. It avoids any arteries and is one of the safest places to do it. It'll break the skin and you'll bleed a little, but it should be completely safe so long as you don't try to throw me off with my teeth still in you. And quat. He hesitated to answer, but he sighed as he did. Just one time? And quat. She nodded emphatically, almost begging to hear him answer with her body language. Yes, just one time right there. I'll be slow and keep my head steady so it won't hurt as much. And quat. Rolling his shoulders, Izuku shook his head as he made his way to the sofa. Patting the spare cushions, he allowed a defeated look to take over. Fine, but promise me you won't do that randomly when we touch. If we're being rough, sure, but give me a sign so I can prepare mentally. And quat. Her hands came together in a clap as she began to jump up and down like the whole world had been handed to her with the biggest smile on her face. Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. I swear it won't be that bad. I'll even go put on. And quat. Izuku shot her a glare as he cut her off. I can't stay because I have to go to work in 11 hours and it'll take 1 just to get back, 9 to sleep and 1.5 to get ready. If I was able, I'd spend the night, but I can't. So just please do what you said, no more, no less. And quat. Himiko pouted a bit at his refusal of her offer, but she saw his logic. Izuku threw off his hoodie and slipped his right arm over the top of his shirt to let her have easy access to where she wanted. The blonde smiled at this, quickly slipping her pants off before he had time to protest, and approached him. Her underwear was a teal blue that hugged her bottom very well, and she managed to sit right in the middle of his lap, effectively straddling him while her arms and legs trapped him. Izuku wanted to say something, but he knew it was pointless now when she whispered in his ear. So tell me the tap word again, just so I know you remember it. And quat. Rolling his eyes while trying to not let himself be swept up by the mood or the way she was starting to shift her hips against his, Izuku repeated the word. Pineapple. And quat. Himiko grinned at his compliance, whispering into his ear once more while she began to stroke his hair and put more weight into her hips so that perhaps it'll entice him to stay. Good boy. Pineapple. And quat. He grit his teeth when he felt something rise up from his crotch in response to her rubbing her hips against his. Pineapple. And quat. She kept the smirk as she placed a few kisses on his neck, moving her hands from his hair to his back and letting the tension build inside him. Pineapple. And quat. Izuku realized this was becoming an endurance race between them, which if he lost, would mean he actually would spend the night at this rate and possibly be in danger of a bad service review this quarter. Pineapple. And quat. Her tongue lashed up at the lower part of his earlobe, nibbling and licking it as she began to work her way downward. Before she answered, the slasher lifted her shirt up, threw it to the floor and removed her bra, exposing herself more to his wanting eyes. She shifted again, putting her mouth right to his ear again and whispering the word. Pineapple. And quat. She began to suck along the skin of his neck, making sure to leave dark purple stains when she pulled away until she came to the exact spot right she wanted. Slowly Himiko came back to his ear and allowed a shiver to run through him as he began to reach to touch her. I'm going to bite now, ready? And quat. Izuku breathed as deeply as he could to try and gather his higher reasoning, which was slipping away faster by the second. Why yeah. And quat. A smile crossed her when she heard that. Himiko wagged a finger at him when she turned his head towards her and raised 3 fingers to signal what she wanted, and to her delight, he said it. Yes mommy. And quat. Izuku felt his entire body tense as nothing happened for 5 nerve-wracking seconds, then a sensation like 4 large needles slowly slinking into his skin came. It was a strange, wet feeling as he let out a groan of pain and winced as the nerves under the skin screamed that something was wrong. It got worse as the needles expanded in the wound, slowly widening it until they reached their root. The slight curve of her fangs dug into the skin like a hook, and once it had gotten to their halfway mark, the rest of her teeth started to dig into the skin. It was like a wood saw was being pressed into his body, and when her mouth finally came to a full close, Izuku could feel his blood start to pump right into her maw. Himiko didn't move and Izuku didn't ask her to. Instead they stayed in a slight stasis until the sound of gulping began to echo off the walls. Izuku turned his eyes to stare at her, not quite believing that she was actually feeding off him like a vampire bat. Then, if that wasn't enough to shock him, he saw Himiko's eyes go unnaturally still as her pupils dilated. A few more seconds and she unlatched her jaw from his body, looking like she had found some profound secret. Izuku, on the other hand, had to contend with his actively bleeding shoulder while she continued to stare at the red she managed to wipe away from her teeth. Then that look was directed at him while he was nursing his ruin of a body part. "What blood type are you?" ? Izuku wanted to answer but was silenced with a wince when she opened up the first aid kit and began to work on the injury, firstly by pouring disinfectant on the bite, which stung like a son of a bitch. "Oh, negative. Why?" ? Himiko didn't take her eyes away from what she was doing as his shoulder was being patched up, but there was a sense of wonder in her voice. "Because that was the most delicious blood I've ever had. It tasted light and fruity with a lot of iron in it. Usually with people or animals there's never something like that." Izuku pursed his lips at that, now starting to feel uncomfortable in a physical way since he was being compared to something to be consumed. "Glad I could help. I hope this won't be an everyday thing because I don't think I could last if that was the case." The kit was shut close as Himiko finished tending to his injury. She smiled seductively and kissed him square in the mouth. "Don't worry about that, Zuzu. I'll just break the skin every so often. That way you won't leak out and I can keep making you feel good, alright?" He questioned how he got into a situation where the concept of breaking his skin open and spilling his blood was used in the same tone as teasing him about screwing. Izuku placed his hands around her waist, glad his arm could move just fine, and let his thoughts be known. "Himiko, I don't have a problem if you want to do stuff like this, but it's very different from you hitting me. I take a beating like a champ, but I only have the baseline amount of blood in my body, so if this is something you want, then it needs to happen only every 3 months so I won't get too low and die." He felt more conscious about saying what he wanted to say next, but screw it, if he couldn't talk to her then who could he talk to? "If you're having problems with your quirk then I can take you to a clinic for that, but you can't use me to feed like that all the time. If I could do it without worry then sure, but I can't. I'm sorry about that, but I need to draw a line for my own safety." The girl studied him for a good long minute with an annoyance on her face that soon turned to fear when she heard him finish. Himiko tightened her limbs around him as that fear turned to panic. "Ah shit, I didn't mean it like that. I just wanted to know what you were like on the inside, and I guess I should have phrased it better. Yeah, my quirk is related, but I'm in control. I take enough blood daily to where I don't need to feed to survive, but ... She pursed her lips as she let go of him and began to stand up. "The best way to put it is that I view blood as the ultimate way to get to know someone, and with all we went through I guess I got ahead of myself." The reserve vanished from Izuku and much of the sexual interest as he stared at her. "Wait, so does your quirk allow you to view the memories and perspective of the people you take it from?" Himiko shook her head as a massive discomfort came over her at his questioning. "No, it's hard to explain. That aside, however, I want to promise you I won't be drinking any more of your blood without asking first. That was really out of line and I should have more self-control, especially when you've been so wonderful to me. I will bite you a lot in the future, but I won't drink from it, I swear." Izuku squinted at the woman as he stood up from the sofa, putting his arm back right and grabbing his coat. He closed the distance between them and stuck a hand down the underside back of her panties, grabbing himself a handful of her rear. "Never in my entire life did I think I'd have to have a conversation about this. I'm fairly certain we're the only people who ever talk about this kind of thing, and I'm okay with it. You're a wonderful woman who's been nothing but good to me and a boon to my life, so if a little pain is all you ask for then that's fine." He leaned forward and kissed her, making sure to have it last. "I'll see you soon." As Izuku walked towards the exit, Himiko reached out for his wrist before he could leave. "Hey Izuku?" He turned to face her. "Yeah?" She stared right into his soul when she spoke, feeling it climb out of her and into him. "I love you." The man didn't respond immediately, letting the words nest in his mind as a smile came over him. "I love you too." The next day. What the hell happened? Izuku was not a violent man, he was not a mean man. He never stole, he never fought, he did everything he was supposed to. But right now, he had to restrain himself from lashing out at the woman who gave birth to him. It was 7:30 in the morning, an hour and a half before he needed to be at work, and she was in his living room holding a bag of breakfast food. He had barely heard her come in from his bedroom, and that he thanked the god of fate he had thrown on a shirt before going to bed last night. Because the moment he walked out to investigate the noise with his sleep-addled brain, she had seen the bandages around his shoulder and started screaming. This was not how he wanted to start his morning. Izuku glared at his mother as he walked to the fridge and pulled a can of Monster to hopefully wake him up while she continued screaming. What the hell did that girl do to you, Izuku inquired. He said nothing as he mentally blocked him out like he had since he was a kid. That only served to make her more upset when she dropped her bag of food and grabbed him by the hem of his shirt. Tell me right now! Inquired. Gently Izuku moved her hands away and finished his breakfast in a can. With a half step he made to return to his room in order to get his outfit together. I need to get ready for work. Inquired. His voice showed more indifference and scorn than he wanted, but his mother was on a roll. Her quirk activated, pulling him back with a yank as the multiple small surface areas of his clothes were attracted to her like a magnet. Inko grabbed his arm in a vice-like grip, clutching his arm like to let go would mean his death. You're going to the hospital! Inquired. Izuku rolled his eyes again as he thrust his arm away. There were very few times in his life where he let his emotions show to anyone since that always ended in bad things for him. Usually he'd bury it and hide behind a smile until he was numb. Now was becoming one of those rare times where he let some of the anger out. Glaring at his mother Izuku, simultaneously feeling the pressure of his obligation to get to his job if he wanted to afford to live and the lifelong resentment towards his caretaker. I'm fine, Mom. My wound is taken care of and I can move my arm just fine. What I need to do is make sure my only stream of livable income isn't cut off. So can you do me a favor and go before I lose any more time? Inquired. Inko's expression grew more unhinged as her eyes went wide with panic. She gripped him by the collar, holding close until their noses were touching. Izuku, if that isn't treated it could get infected and you could die or even lose your arm. You need medical care now! Inquired. He shook his head at her ridiculous outburst, wanting nothing more than to leave. Mom, it isn't! Inquired. His back was slammed against the fridge while his mother looked on with tears forming in her eyes. The panic was turning into rage as the fire of 4 days' worth of horrible speculations came forth. That girl is making you say that, isn't she? She's been threatening you into not speaking out because she keeps hurting you, isn't it? Inquired. Izuku growled and broke his mother's hold on his collar, walking past her and towards his room before stopping right when was about to gather his outfit. There was a resentment in his eyes that Inko could see, but she didn't flinch at it when he answered. Everything we've done has been because I agreed to it. She never forces me to do that kind of stuff. Inquired. The woman stared at him in disbelief, not used to hearing the steel in his tone. But why, sweetie? What could possibly make? Inquired. She halted when a terrible realization came upon her. Her hands covered her mouth like she witnessed some atrocity play out before her, and a gasp followed soon after in a low, quiet voice. Fear was in her eyes when she continued. Izuku, have you been intimate with this woman? Inquired. Her son said nothing for a few select heartbeats while his cheeks began to glow red and his eyesight fell to the right. Izuku popped his knuckles to fill the silence before daring to look his mother in the eye as a shred of guilt lingering in him. Yes, quite a few times in fact. We've even slept in the same bed almost weekly now. Himiko is really consistent about those kinds of things. Inquired. He sighed and grabbed clothes from inside his room. If you want to know why, Mom, it's because I love her. She was there for me when nobody else was, and it's because of her that I want to start improving myself. Sure, she's weird, but she's mine, and frankly I'm getting tired of hearing you badmouth her in my house. Inquired. Inko took this like she heard him say he wanted to make love to an electric saw. Do you have any idea how earth-staggeringly dumb you sound right now? Izuku, this girl could very well be a murderer for all you know, and she's already displayed violent tendencies. For another thing, how do you know she isn't carrying a bug like HIV with all the blood she drinks? Whatever you think you see in her is wrong, sweetie. I'm sure it might feel good in the moment, but being with a person like that will destroy you in the long run, and I don't want to show up at a hospital where you're dying from blood loss because of that demonic little scan. Inquired. A boom echoed through the room as Izuku slammed a fist through his coffee table, harmlessly shattering the cheap partial board when his entire face turned a shade of purple. His voice was calm, controlled, and laced with the worst kind of venom in his words, like an assassin's blade which stung deep with a cold pain. Get out! Inquired. Inko blinked, not sure she heard correctly. What? Inquired. Splinters clung to the meat of his hand as his eyes narrowed dangerously at the woman. He did not move. He did not have the look of explosive, masculine anger upon his face, nor did his tone carry a hint of uneven volume. Instead, there was a visage of cold, removed emotion that breathed in the promise of bodily harm if not death. It was a primal thing of ancient times which transcended language and could be understood effortlessly by even a fool. Get out now, before I make you. Inquired. Stepping away from her son, Inko looked on with an actual fear in her eyes, but that wrestled with the lifetime of motherhood towards the man who was her child. She smiled weakly, as if to break whatever ailment possessed him. Regardless, she still backed away towards the exit. Sweetie, I understand you're feeling a lot of new emotions right now and that girl is whispering in your ear. But when you're ready to talk, just give me a call and I'll help you get better. Inquired. Izuku kept staring like he was ready to rip out her eyes, so Inko opened the front door and left, leaving Izuku to glare at the world around him. Fortunately, he soon buried that feeling and proceeded with his morning routine before work, careful to remove the splinters from his hand as he showered. The anger remained under his skin, dwelling like water in a hot radiator, just waiting to be vomited out at the slightest twist of the seal. No one would notice it from the outset since it dwelled in his veins with the rest of his darker aspects, but the smile was gone from the mask. He simply stared ahead, viewing the world through hollow, burning eyes as he marched to earn his daily bread. His arrival at the office was typical enough. He clocked in, sat down and got to work, instantly going into his own head while he types away at the keyboard. A few glances were thrown at the admittedly large bandage under the pad of his shoulder, but he ignored them. Izuku had never wanted to kill his mother. Out of everyone on Earth, she was the least deserving of that kind of treatment after working so hard to raise him. He didn't want to kill her now, but he knew why he was feeling almost homicidal. It was the cocktail in his veins. All that anger and resentment and pain and envy constantly stewed within him. Most days it was hardly noticeable unless he thought about it. Others it pumped around his soul like a poison or an armor depending on the situation. It was so hard to tell the reasons apart in the haze of the broth that it spilled over into other areas. Sometimes he wanted to break down sobbing over a late report because his dad abandoned him. Sometimes he wanted to rip his supervisor's throat out with a pen despite the man just saying, "How was your weekend?" Because of the times Kachan burned him. Izuku never acted on these thoughts, but they were there, as frightening as they were. He accepted them because if he hadn't, then it would start to overtake his blood and then his mind, and then he'd lash out due to the poison in his brain. He learned it after he pushed that Kenjaku fuck down the stairs for setting hair on fire. The asshole only got a broken arm, but he still got suspension despite having charred black hair and a flanking, bare scalp. It was why he wanted to kill himself instead of going after those that wronged him. It wasn't worth the loss of life for simple childhood bullying unless they had done something truly evil. The people would still label him a mentally ill loser who never got over some high school roughhousing, and that would be his whole legacy to the world. He wanted to be known for something good, something worthy of remembering for the way it helped people become better and the world a little less shit. That's why he was the limit breaker. It was a start. Sighing as another hour passed, his mind started to wander to Himiko. He felt a sharp pain radiate from the bite wound, yet at the same time he also could feel her rubbing up against his groin. It was an interesting combination, but soon he started to imagine the feel of her skin and the nice, warm sensation from when he kissed her. It felt right to grab her and stake a claim. As barbaric as it sounded, the more time he spent around her, the more he wanted to slap some mark on her skin, her soul that screamed mine. Those that touch will be killed in the most horrible way I imagine at the moment. And quat. He knew how insane that sounded, especially since he was a grown man, but it was so nerve-wracking. Finally he had gotten something good, better than good, but for how long could he keep it? Keep her in love with him? In his youth he'd been played before by false declarations of love, and he'd seen breakups firsthand. It was awful seeing how one person could callously leave another for some usually petty reason. His mother had been alone since then, and it destroyed her. Weeping on the sofa for days, not getting up for a week, and being so depressed that only him begging to show her an all-might video could summon just a smirk. Izuku would rather die than have that happen to him, but he couldn't make her stay if she wanted to go. So, he'd have to show his underbelly continuously to this woman who might turn around at any moment and abandon him when her infatuation wore off and she could see the hollow, worthless shell under it. He just wanted to be happy, and no matter how hard he tried, Izuku just couldn't get happy by himself. He needed someone, anyone, to be there so he was less shit as a person, so he could look forward to something. He knew from experience that's why he would never be truly happy, because he was always at the mercy of others, and most people were fickle even at the best of times. Hell, at this point he wanted nothing more than to plow her, to give himself completely and take her in turn, to let it all go and just behave like animals between the two of them, even if blood was involved. Yes, he might have a chance with some other women, as unlikely as that may be, but Himiko was a sure thing. She had gained some of his trust, and even if someone like Ashido spread her legs for him, it wouldn't be as secure. There wouldn't be an understanding of how he was, who he was as a person. It'd just be a cheap physical thrill that'd leave him ashamed and lonely by the end. Maybe he could get as close to someone else as he was to Himiko, but he loved her, for whatever that was worth in this world. All he wanted was to show her how much he loved her and have that be reciprocated instead of rebuked. He wanted to hear her moan his name as he made all her problems vanish for a night. His biggest wish was to have her quake as he made her know he loved her more than anything, to throw every last repressed thing into his thrusts and maybe make a family from it all. Izuku never thought about having children, mainly because there was never a chance of it happening until now. Thinking about it, he'd actually liked the idea since it would always connect them and he could produce something of worth. Sighing silently, Izuku looked up at the clock and decided to work through his lunch break. Better that, so he could go home early. The idea would have been successful if it hadn't been for a tap directed at his shoulder. Turning around he saw Tensen standing behind him holding a lunchbox. The red-headed man regarded him with concern hidden behind a weak smile, his eyes switching from Izuku's hand to his face. "Hey man, You alright? You haven't said a word since our shift started. And quat. The quirkless man shrugged, not being rude enough to ignore his coworker. Just trying to get through the day. And quat. Tenzin pursed his lips and took the seat next to Izuku's desk, setting the lunchbox down next to him. Midoriya, you aren't looking good. I know it's none of my business since this is just a job, but for the entire time I've worked here, you have been a brick wall. You never reach out to anybody, never try to hang out for drinks after work, it's always just you alone. And quat. He pointed to the partially swollen right hand resting on the keyboard. Then you start coming in with a busted fist and what looks like bandages on your shoulder if I'm guessing correctly. I suppose what I want to say is, are you alright? And quat. Izuku looked to the redhead with a glance of gratitude under the indifferent mask he wore. Shaking his head, he felt himself relax a bit. Honestly? No. And quat. There came a moment of silence before he touched the burning skin of his hand, regretting his earlier outburst at home. I got a lot going on with me. Nobody is threatening me or anything, and it isn't like I'm about to become destitute. It's all in my head, every little problem that makes my life suck a little more. Reason being that I have no idea how to handle a good thing and I'm scared shitless of it ending. And quat. Tenzin put a hand on the lower shoulder and placed the meal on Izuku's desk. I know what you mean. Joy is as fleeting as the wind, isn't it? Anyway, I told my ma about how you eat nothing but cup noodles, so she decided to have me bring you an extra lunch. And quat. Izuku looked at the box and suddenly felt like the world's biggest asshole. How long had it been since he had just overlooked the taste of food for efficiency's sake? Grabbing it and opening the lid, he saw rows of fresh fried chicken atop a bed of white rice with a whole other slot filled with little sugar cookies. He stared at it in disbelief right as the other man left to go eat, yet Izuku managed to speak up before he left the office. Hey Mushi? And quat. The redhead turned, surprised to hear his first name being used. Yeah? And quat. A crack came from Izuku's voice that almost broke the mask. It was filled with an immense emotion that neither knew what to make of. Thank you. And quat. The workday ended, thankfully, right when it was beginning to get to him. The gesture from Tenzin helped ease his anger by a large margin, but it was still there. His hands clenched every so often as he entered the metro. What was he to do now? Going home was out of the question since his mother might still be around, waiting to make him feel even worse. There were still 6 hours before he needed to wind down for the night. Maybe he should hit up the agency, see if he can get some training in. Thinking back on it, he found himself remembering how he rushed what happened at Himiko's last night. He contemplated the idea and soon asked 2 questions. Was there a chance he would take out his anger on her? And did he really feel like getting punched, bitten or beat up with a club just to feel some tits? And quat. The first was far more worrying than the second. He had rarely let his anger out at a person and he never wanted to subject the people he loved to it, least of all her. Still, he did owe her, right? And getting beat might help to submerge the feelings of rage, so off he went. Pausing as he got off the tram, Izuku turned to enter the convenience store and bought a few cases of energy drinks to maybe make his arrival less shitty if his mood got away from him. Eventually he arrived at her apartment and knocked while the cases laid by his feet. The locks came undone as he waited, revealing Himiko in all her shut-in glory with the same knife in her right hand. She looked tired, like sleep was becoming alien to her, but in spite of that, she smiled. It was a warm, affectionate smile that looked bare to the nub compared to the neutral mask Izuku has on. He managed a small smile, but it faded right as Himiko began to talk. So you came back for more, eh? Last night left you wanting, didn't it? And quat. His face remained neutral as he stepped past her with the cases in hand. Setting them to the kitchen floor, Izuku set himself on the sofa and tried to make the disguise he carried from work drop. It was difficult to say the least with the rest of the emotions built up under it. Looking at his partner, Izuku felt himself decompress in how he was. Himiko, however, was more inclined to stare with a visage of sympathy. Putting the knife aside, she walked over to the sofa and cuddled up next to him, cooing and touching where she could. You had a hard day, didn't you? And quat. Izuku held her in turn, glad to simply be for once today. Then he let go as that stupid question came back to the forefront. It lingered on his tongue for minutes as he paced around the living room in silence, letting his emotions bubble while she looked curiously at his expression. Turning around and hoping he could control his tone, Izuku exhaled the demon which had been waiting in his lungs. Do you have HIV? And quat. If there was a way to describe the range of shock on her face, Izuku came up short. Horror, panic, indignation, disgust and anger melded on her form, and it only grew worse when she leapt off the couch. No. Where in the high and holy fuck did you get that idea? And quat. He pursed his lips at his partner, suddenly more self-conscious than ever before. My mother may have suggested that when she barged into my apartment at 7 in the morning. And quat. The blonde glared at him judgmentally as she stepped forward, practically getting up in his face. Your mother is the most prissy, overreacting, critical bitch I've seen next to my own mother. I'm cleaner than a chapel with the papers to prove it. I haven't been with anyone, I haven't taken blood from anyone dirty, All I ever do is drink animal products and that's it ! And quat. A finger jabbed down at his wrist. And what the hell happened to your hand ? And quat. Izuku backed down at her rage, more out of embarrassment than any sort of fear. His eyes darted to the floor as he recounted the day. I slammed it through my coffee table because my mom wouldn't leave. And quat. Himiko inhaled with the emotion still ripe on her face, but it became much more calm and cold as she held his gaze. It had the same sort of fury that Aunt Mitsuki would harbor, but it was a finer sort, one refined and tempered into a killing edge that sent a wave of fear into his soul. She grabbed his collar and pushed him away, causing him to softly hit the wall as she entered her room. Nothing happened for a few heart-stopping minutes before Himiko stepped in more modest attire and grabbed her handbag. Come on, we're going to the hospital. And quat. Izuku flinched at the statement, but he saw the reasoning behind it. He had full medical coverage, including coverages for surgeries, so it wouldn't be too taxing. Yet he despised how she glared daggers at him. It was a strange sort, not made of repulsion, but a sort of look one would have to a misbehaving dog. Izuku sighed, checked his wallet to make sure he had his insurance card and walked up behind her. All rig. And quat. She snapped back with that fire blazing in her eyes. A finger was thrown his way and with cane-bared teeth. Shut it. You decided to go leading in with your emotions and instead of acting them out in a healthy way like an adult, you chose to vent out what is probably only a fraction of lifelong resentment by smashing shit. This is no different than when you tried to throw yourself off that damn bridge and knowing this is only the first bit of bullshit in what's a long list of outbursts. Except I need to make sure you're alright because I couldn't live with myself if something happened to you, so keep your mouth sealed until we get that hand fixed. And quat. His hands balled and a sliver of resentment was starting to combust, only it was born and directed at her. Blinking at the emotion and knowing what would happen if it was allowed to fester, he opened his mouth, earning him another glare from his lover. Then tell me how you're so well adjusted. You never seem to have these issues and it's just, how am I not supposed to lash out at anything when I can't take it? It isn't like I hit her or anything and this isn't a common thing, but you mean to say you have no hidden anger just clawing away at you sometimes? Himiko's eyes lowered to a shake of the head that almost declared his naivety in comparison to her. The reason I'm not a raging lunatic is because I went to get mental help and learned that things can still be worth something after all I did. It was hard and humiliating to admit that something was wrong with me and how I saw the world, but when I had so much telling me otherwise, I needed to adapt or die. I had a serious mental illness because I had no clue on how to handle my quirk. You just hold too much inside. And quat. Her expression shifted to an almost scornful yet understanding expression. Which I guess is because nobody ever taught you how to handle your emotions and instead just mask it all so you could be perfect in their eyes. And quat. She put a hand to his cheek and rubbed it tenderly. It's okay, I'm here to help you get better and I know it's gonna be hard, but I promise that you'll feel better eventually. It just takes time and dedication. And quat. There was a slight sting at that, like it had gotten to the point and Izuku didn't like that. It felt too honest about himself. Like she took one look at him and could read him like a book, that none of his trials and tribulations had any weight or depth or meaning behind them. He scowled at her as if he was a teenager, unable to fully articulate his worries before he decided to just flat out ask one of his biggest issues. It wasn't like any other time would be better. But, how the fuck did you get over your anger at the world then? If you know anything about that, which you seem to, then why are you so damn content? Don't you have anyone you hate? Anyone who wronged so bad it still lingers years later? Doesn't that just eat away at you until you can't take it anymore? And quat. Her expression darkened significantly at his words, as if he had wronged her in some way. Yet she didn't strike him or reach for a weapon or even bare her teeth. She simply pointed to a photo of her holding a peace sign with some guy in a black and gray suit. I never got over my anger. I'm still fucking angry at the world and I did do something about it. I joined a villain group, started killing heroes to make a statement along with other people who hurt me. I acted on everything you're talking about now and I learned one fucking thing, which is the world doesn't care. Nobody cares if you're enraged at everything in life or whatever your backstory was. If you start killing people without a really good fucking reason then they'll burn you. And quat. Her eyes narrowed as if they could cut through time. I was extremely lucky because I was able to learn that fact and walk away with a somewhat normal life. But it came at a fucking cost. That guy was the closet thing I had to family out of those few others who I loved as my own and he was murdered right in front of me while I was holding him to stop the bleeding. I killed the son of a bitch who did it. I got even. But it was in vain because every one of them died. And quat. Red veins began to pop up around the whites of her eyes and there was a feral quality to her voice. Every single one of the only people who took in a murderous freak like me had been murdered. Even our leader who had one of the strongest quirks of all time, and I saw it happen. I saw his fucking head pop into a red mist while the bastard who did it screamed out some weird name. That fucker killed them all. Lizard Boy, Burning Man, Magic Man, Ghosty, he murdered them all and now people love him for it. I can't get even because he's too powerful and I won't lose this life I have. And quat. She glared right at him now, stabbing right to his soul with her eyes. I can never get revenge for my family. I can never see him suffer for what he did, and yeah, we deserved it. I'll admit that. But a hero is meant to save people. Stain made that clear, but none of it matters. The dead can't come back, and I at least have you now, so I put my anger aside for what matters to me. You matter to me, my peace and security matter to me, my little bit of comfort matters to me. That's more important to me than letting some asshole live rent-free in my head. And quote. Izuku froze, caught between fear and shame. What exactly does he say to that? Can he even say anything to that? Should he apologize or just stay quiet? Should he ask what these things meant? Comfort her? Thankfully Himiko made the decision for him when she sighed, shook her head and ushered out a small, warm smile at him. Gently she held his wrist and pulled him forward. Come on Zuzu, let's go. And quote. Later at the hospital, the procedure given was unnaturally fast. It was literally just him checking into the clinic, waiting for his name to be called while Himiko waited in the common room, stepping into the doctor's office, explaining the situation and then being given a neon green shot. Whatever was inside that syringe may as well be magic, since his hand literally shifted back into shape like some hit a rewind button on it. Stranger still, the doctor said it was covered by public health coverage, so it was literally free. He was still staring at his hand in amazement when he walked back out to see Himiko haphazardly reading some dime store romance novel. She raised an eyebrow at him, clearly as surprised as him. That didn't take long. And quote. Izuku continued to study his hand as if he was either high or dreaming. He brought his eyes up to face the woman and kept his astonishment. They gave me some weird shot and my hand just fixed itself. And quote. Himiko shrugged, taking him by the arm and dragging him out of the clinic as she put her book away. That's modern medical technology for you. Get moving, we got a lot of stuff to do. And quote. He raised an eyebrow as they moved out to the street, feeling her trap his arm around her own. Such as ? And quote. A flick of a finger caught him in the ear, making him wince as she stepped closer, slipping a hand through his suit to caress his chest. Her fingers lingered, going up and down, feeling every little bump and patch of malformed skin as a mischievous, almost malicious smile took shape. Such as us continuing where we left off. And quote. She leaned in so that her voice could be only as a whisper, one filled with a heavy sense of need, for lack of a better word. Her nails dug into the fabric of his coat and she let a bit of her tongue slip into his ear before she put a hand over it. After last night you left way too soon. I don't hold it against you, of course, but I had to stop myself from breaking into your apartment to get my fill for the night. You were so needy and pathetic that it got really in the mood. I wanted to strap you down like the stupid dog you were and make you have that face again. And quote. Her hands hovered around the waistline of his pants and a thumb was slotted in, rolling her skin against his belt line. I didn't because I knew you'd come back, but the way it felt to grind against you as your blood entered my mouth, and knowing you enjoyed it like the nasty, disgusting pervert I know you are. Once you left I couldn't stop touching myself to that. And quote. Izuku grabbed her in turn, slinking a hand around her rear and squeezing as they walked. His voice was in a hot whisper as he imagined her doing that to herself. Did you use a knife to get there? Wrapped it up in duct tape and put it inside since you love pain? And quote. A finger tapped him on the nose as they continued walking. Maybe, maybe not. I do that on occasion, but for you, oh, I have plans for you. Don't you worry Zuzu. For now just focus on what's coming. I promise to be gentle. And quote. The infectious aura she was giving off suddenly died when something was becoming too much for him. Stepping to the side he began to walk in a slight angle, careful not to stand all the way up. Bringing her close as they neared the train station, Izuku lowered his voice as he spoke conspiratorially into her ear. I need to ask you something when we get back home. You'll probably say no to it, which is fine, but I need a favor that you won't like. And quote. Himiko looked down when he stepped closer as if to partially hide behind her. Something was poking her tight and she knew exactly what it was. A smirk came across her when Izuku blushed at his obvious desire, yet he kept a hand on her hip as if to say, I'm not denying myself anymore. And quote. She said nothing as the train continued, merely getting closer until it reached the stop. After a quick waltz back to her apartment they both moved to the sofa, neither removing their hands as if it was some kind of game. Izuku's grip tightened and he was clearly getting more into it, but he halted when it hit him. Pulling away with his breathing growing a hitch in it, he turned to see Himiko smiling expectantly, speaking as if she was the one in charge. So what do you need, Zuzu? And quote. As if to add emphasis to her emotion Himiko removed her pants and then her underwear like it was the most casual thing in the world to do, making him blink as he fought to keep his eyes upright. And quote. He shut his eyes and inhaled, unsure if this was going too far given how she said she wanted things to go. I need you to help me finish. And quote. Himiko flinched at the request, but looked down at her own groin. It wasn't like there was any shame between the two of them, and since she was letting him see hers, may as well at this point. A snap came from within her shirt as she pulled it off and exposed her bra before throwing the loose article to the other end of the room. She was completely nude now and he could see everything. The reaction on his face made her cheeks warm up as she crawled towards him like a tiger. He was completely in a trance upon seeing her bare, and his teeth had a slight chatter to him like his body couldn't hold it all in. A hand touched his face, making look her in the eye as she kissed him, holding his cheek as her tongue slipped in. It lasted all of 5 seconds before Himiko kept a smirk, slipping her index finger inside his undershirt and lightly dragging the nail over the skin. "Take your pants off for me." Quat. Izuku undid the belt around his waist and threw both his pants and overshirt off in a frenzy to expose as much of himself as possible, baring his undershirt. His cock was already erect as it had any right to be, but he shivered when she wrapped a hand around it, making him stare right at her when she tugged at the skin with the sand-like calluses of her hand. "You want this, right? For me to touch you like this?" Quat. He nodded, fighting against his instinct to grab as she continued. "Well, if you want that, then I need something in return. You gotta let me bite you again, deal?" Quat. Izuku hesitated for a moment, worried that it might lead to some feeding again, but he was too hungry to care. "Alright, but don't drink from it, and you gotta work me while you do it." Quat. Smiling, she let go of his member and went to fetch a first aid kit from the kitchen. Setting that down on the coffee table, she eyed him like one set to play with a new toy and paused as she stood, allowing to get a full view of her. "Do you mind if I put something on? Been waiting since yesterday to show you this new outfit I bought." Quat. Izuku gestured to her bedroom, finding his patient slipping more and more by the second. Taking the signal, she entered for what felt like eternity before returning in what could only be described as a tight black leather corset with cutouts for her nipples to poke through. Her legs were wrapped up in fishnet stockings that squeezed the muscle on her thighs, and to top off she wore red platform heels, which Izuku raised an eyebrow at. "Are those really necessary?" Quat. Himiko raised an eyebrow in return. "What, you don't like my shoes?" Quat. "I'm kinda indifferent to that right now. They look good on you, but I don't want you to roll your ankle or worse while we're doing this." Quat. Himiko glared at him, but complied as she threw her heels off and approached him, sitting left to him rather than on top of him this time. "So just tell me the tap word before we start." Quat. Izuku rolled his eyes at her, his hands rolling around the inner of her legs and barely reaching out to touch her crotch. "We both know the word already, can't we just skip?" Quat. She snapped forward with a glare, poking him in the chest. "No, because we need to know it for safety, and if you forget it and I push too much, then that's an issue that might put you in the hospital. Now repeat after me, pineapple." He rolled his eyes but complied. "Pineapple." Quat. She said it again. "Pineapple." Quat. As did he. "Pineapple." Quat. Himiko wrapped a hand around his dick, careful to grip it tight to feel the veins throb to reach past her fingers. "Pineapple." Quat. Izuku felt his body tense under attention, but followed the schedule as he let his left arm out while he dared to continue teasing right on the border between her legs. "Pineapple." Quat. She nodded at his passing of the remembrance ritual and began to inch forward to kiss his neck, but Izuku gripped her wrist before she could go any further. His face had that same sad puppy dog eyes as when he asked if he could grope her. "Himiko, I don't know if I should have asked this before we checked into this, and I already know you said I can't touch down there, but is there anything I can do to return the favor somehow? Because I know you might have a thing for blood, but there has to be a way I can give back." Quat. Sighing at his concern for her enjoyment, the slasher spread her legs, letting him see her short trimmed area, and spoke. "Right now it's fine. I'm already making you climax, only right to do the same." Quat. He pursed his lips at the offer and caressed a thumb over the hand holding his family rod, not sure what to make of it. "How would you like me to do it?" Quat. Himiko shrugged and put out her free hand. "Slowly stick your index finger in and curl it inside over and over again like you're signaling someone to come here. Like this, okay? Be sure to touch the top part, and if I start bleeding, then that either means you scratched my walls or my hymen just popped. I'm assuming this is just like using a shake weight?" Quat. Izuku nodded in kind, slowly inching closer as he allowed his fingers to touch the rim of her vagina. "Yeah, there ain't a lot to it. Just go up and down as hard as you can, as fast as you can. That being said, shouldn't we grab some towels since this is gonna cause a mess?" Quat. Himiko shrugged at the idea and came closer, feeling his finger enter her as she did. "I don't care, just get started before I die of waiting." Quat. She began to kiss at his neck, starting above the top of the ear and progressively making her way down while she pumped away at his member. Her insides felt warm and wet as Izuku curled his fingers like she requested. He saw how she now had a slight tremble to her. He repeated the action as her muscles clamped down on him, making her in turn increase the intensity of her jerking. She continued to kiss right to the unmarked sweet spot on his left shoulder while her hips began to twist and shake from the feeling of being played with, keeping in rhythm with him as they acted. Testingly, she let her teeth pinch at his skin before looking back at him for confirmation. Izuku placed his free hand on the back of her head, running his fingers through her hair with a nod while he continued to work on her. The familiar pain of large needles slowly encroaching on the area of his shoulder came with a reckoning, making him pause for a moment until he refocused on pleasing her. The pain was awful, but at the same time he was being stimulated, so he chose to ignore it and focus on the pleasure. There were low-sounding moans coming from her when he picked up the pace to distract from the hurt, and before long he was feeling the sensation of pressure building inside his groin, while at the same time he felt her inner muscles clamp and shift as they gave way to his finger right as he inserted another one. He withheld a groan of pain when Himiko detached her mouth from him, exposing the wound to the air as she grabbed his face. If he hadn't known the woman as well as he did, Izuku would have found her visage horrifying, with how the still wet blood clinged to her jaw like a living dye, making her appear outright monstrous right as she pulled in for a kiss. The taste of iron, copper and other things mixed with his tongue when Himiko clung to him. Normally he would have been disgusted and very much disturbed by the whole event, especially in combination with the screaming pain in his shoulder, but right now he couldn't care. He leaned into it, throwing his hips up to perhaps add more friction to her hand, and she did the same by throwing her hips backwards and forwards. He was so close now he could feel it. All the sensations, the pain, the arousal, the sensation of feeling her skin, the strange feeling of fear, combined at once as a sense of euphoria hit him like a cannonball, making him feel like everything was good in the world as it erupted out of him. At the same time he felt Himiko's muscles clench around his fingers and contract as a quiver came from within. He didn't need nor want to explain the aftermath of that heaven, but as his high was coming down even as he reached out for his partner like she would keep adding to the feeling, Izuku saw the results, and it was worrying, considering some of it had actually touched the ceiling. Himiko was still enjoying the sensation, evident by how she clung to him and began to snuggle into the sofa where he was, irrespective of the mess. She rubbed her skin about him, removing the corset so nothing could block the feeling of touch, while her tongue dipped into one of the craters in his weeping shoulder and sampled the blood before returning to using him as an impromptu pillow. It felt good to cuddle after all that, so he decided to follow her lead and just scoop her up and take her to the bedroom. Setting her down on the bed, Izuku shut the door behind him and cut the lights as he climbed up next to her. Yet right as he did that, two things immediately came upon him that made the quirkless man jump right back up, much to his lover's dismay. The first being an overwhelming need to empty his bladder, and the second being the pain coming from his shoulder to remind him, "Hey asshole, you still have a massive hole in your upper torso." And quat. Rushing to the restroom, Izuku did as was needed for the first, but when he stepped out to do the second, Himiko glared jealousy at him. She noticed the still bleeding bite wound in his shoulder and gestured to the sofa where the med kit was opened and the needles and disinfectant were placed next to a rag for him to chew into when the needles went through his skin to patch him up. Guilt lingered on the blonde's face and she shook her head in dismay. "I'm sorry, I forgot about this, Izuku. I just got so caught in the moment with you that I just wanted to lay next to you." And quat. He didn't say a word as the stitching needles began to close the wound, only balling his fists for solo support while she went on. "I mean, that was better than I could have imagined. I could feel every little move you made, and at the same time to feel your blood just slosh around my mouth while you did that. God, that was good." And quat. There came a look of anxiety about her when she completed her work and was shown that he could move the arm just fine. She put a hand to his uninjured arm and stared right at him with pleading eyes. "You can spend the night, right? Tomorrow is a Friday, so your schedule is bound to be packed, and after all we just did, I don't want to fall asleep alone." And quat. Izuku smirked and kissed her, glad to be rid of the issues for now. "Sure, Himiko, I can do that for you." And quat. He picked her up again like she weighed nothing and carried her off to her bedroom before falling to the bed and wrapping his arms around her while she did the same. The room was utterly pitch black, so not caring that his scars might be seen in the morning, Izuku threw his undershirt off and held her close, feeling every inch of his skin meet hers. That night she let him hold her this time, and as sleep was coming upon him, Izuku couldn't stop wondering what the future would hold for him, or if he even had a future. But as he finally fell away, he smiled when he nestled his chin on top of her lower shoulder and grabbed a handful of her breasts. So long as he had her and she had him, everything would be okay in the end. Thanks for watching until the end. I hope you enjoyed. I'll be starting some of those suggestions soon, so keep leaving yours and subscribe so you don't miss out.